千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So without further ado, let's get right back into 43. We started talking about chapter 43 last time, and here's what it looked like. Chapter 43 has only 8 lines, and as we talked about previously, whenever you have 8, chances are pretty good that you can divide it up into 2 halves of 4 lines each. And usually, each of the 4 lines can be further divided up into 2 sets of 2 lines. Last time, we spent quite a bit of time talking about key concepts, 至柔, softest things, 至坚, the hardest things. So we got to the end of line 2. So what were the things that we talked about when it comes to the softest versus the hardest? Well, first we got into this particular slide to talk about the pronunciation, the definition, the meaning. And I talked about how usually at the surface level, most books will just go one level deep and talk about water as the softest thing. While in reality, if you study the historical commentary, if you look at the authentic tradition of the Tao, you quickly learn that there's a lot more than the softest things and they're just water. There's a whole bunch of other manifestations in reality, in the natural world, that also qualify as softest in terms of the formless. So as I say in this slide, water is just the tip of the iceberg. So to be more specific, we brought up 4 different ways to look at 至柔, the softest thing. Water being one of them. Water is formless. It's a liquid, so it does not have a defined shape. It's shapeless. It takes the form of its container. By itself, it is formless. And we got into a discussion about fish living in water, not aware of water. And by extension, we also brought up air. Fish live in water like human beings live in air. Therefore, when we say there's nothing between you and me, well, actually there's air. There's oxygen, there's nitrogen, there's quite a bit of those molecules existing between us. Air is always present. The point is, because we take for granted, it's always around. Thankfully, it's always around, otherwise it could not survive. Like fish out of water, it's always around, we take it for granted. However, we are definitely sensitive to the fact that if the air is stale, we would take steps to try to bring about fresh air. So we also talked about how water and air can both represent the Tao. Water is oftentimes used as a metaphor for the Tao, air not so much. And yet, there is an interesting correspondence in that we enjoy and prefer fresh air. We don't want stale air. If you use air as a metaphor for the Tao, it kind of fits, because when it comes to the Tao, we also want fresh perspectives, fresh insights. We don't want stale old teachings with carryover baggage from the past, dogma So in addition to water and air, now these are matter, these are liquid and gas. What about light? No longer matter, photons are massless. So it is in the Tao also formless. So Wang Bi, this is the young scholar who brought together all the different versions of the Tao Te Ching about 1800 years ago to unify all of them into a standard edition. That standard edition is what's been passed down for almost 2,000 years, and that is the main version of the Tao Te Ching. Much later on, archaeological studies uncovered that there were more ancient versions of the Tao Te Ching that date back before Wang Bi. So there have been discoveries of ancient versions of the Tao Te Ching that's like roughly 2,300 years ago, and so a lot closer to the time of Lao Tzu than Wang Bi, who came after the time of Lao Tzu by 700 years. So there was a tendency, just a historical footnote, there was a tendency to see the older versions, the earliest versions, as the most authentic version. And that's actually a misconception. It's a pervasive misconception among some academics. And the reason why the earliest version is not necessarily the best version or the most accurate or the most definitive version of the Tao Te Ching is because for hundreds of years, the Tao Te Ching was a work in progress. It was always meant to be the great summary of all the Tao wisdom known up until that time. So the earlier versions were the more primitive versions, the less refined versions. Furthermore, Wang Bi, the young scholar who put everything together, he most likely, because he lived 1,800 years ago, he most likely had access to older versions of the Tao Te Ching that no longer exist. So my standard advice, my standard suggestion is to stick with the Wang Bi version. That is, after all, the version that is responsible for crucial elements in the Chinese culture that we study. So anyhow, Wang Bi has said when he came upon this particular chapter, 43, he had remarked that in addition to water, one could also see light as the formless, as the softest. And because these ancient scholars were also poets, he talked poetically about the soft moonlight. At nighttime, it's flooding the landscape. It's going everywhere. So in that respect, it's also a pretty good metaphor for the Tao. It illuminates. And here I just have a little graphic representing light in general. Lastly, and this is the deepest version, deepest layer of meaning when it comes to 43, the softest is actually a reference to thoughts. And thoughts have always been a source of mystery for humanity. We all know we have thoughts, but what are thoughts? What is human consciousness? Is it the soul? What is the soul? Now, in the study of the Tao, it is more important to talk about the thoughts that are aligned with the Tao itself. And what I did in exploring this topic further was, in thinking about life itself, applying this idea of the softest and hardest, I follow in the footsteps of great sages like Grandmaster Chen that I mentioned previously, about how in life, the hardest would be the problems that we have, the bad habits, the negative patterns, and the softest that can overcome that will be Tao-oriented, Tao-aligned thoughts. So there's a lot more to be said about that. For now, though, let's also make sure we cover the other major term from last time, which is 至坚, the hardest. And the important point in 43, as it is in other chapters of the Tao Te Ching, is that the soft overcomes the hard. The softest overcomes the hardest. So there are multiple meanings associated with that as well. With all of the soft elements that we talked about before, the soft manifestations of the Tao, including water, air, light, and thoughts, all of them can be associated with overcoming 至坚, or the hardest. So last time, we covered that as well. And here's what we did. With water, we noted that the Grand Canyon was a great example of water, the softest, overcoming the hard rocks. And this is the cutting action of water over millions of years. What about air? Well, air is not going to cut through rocks like that, right? Well, in actuality, we talked about air, we talked about wind erosion, and there are places out in nature where we can see stunning works, almost like works of art, like natural arches, like this wind sculpture that we see here, all part of all the result of perfectly natural processes, wind erosion. And the result is quite stunning. What about light? Is light going to be creating sculptures also? Well, not in the same way as water and air. But then I switch gears to talk about concentrated, coherent light. Modern technology, lasers, capable of not just cutting through rocks, but metal, even much harder substance. So it's amazing when you think about it. Light, we're used to thinking of light as formless, and yet, when properly harnessed, it has the ability to cut through metal. So then the last thing that we talked about that qualified as the softest was the thoughts that you and I have in our brains. And this is where I brought in Centennial, Grandmaster Ching. He taught the Tao Te Ching frequently, every chapter of the Tao Te Ching, including 43. And when he spoke of this particular chapter, he liked to talk about applying 至柔 and 至坚, the softest and hardest, to life. And here's a picture of the Grandmaster. He's passed away at the age of 100. But definitely a living sage in the authentic Tao tradition, someone that I respect very much. So then, 至柔, 至坚, when Grandmaster Ching talked about it, he used his own example from his own life about using the Tao, the softest, to overcome the negative habits that he had. At the time, the hardest thing, the hardest challenge for him, the most difficult. And when I mentioned this, naturally, there was quite a bit of interest about how exactly one can use the Tao to correct a bad habit, to perhaps replace it with a good habit. So I'll be getting into that. I have a few slides on that today. I would like to share that with you. I'm looking forward to that very much. For now, though, everything up until this slide is a recap from last time, and we're now ready to go beyond line 2 to line 3 to all the way to the end, line 8. So let's start getting into it with line 3, and then we will talk about using the Tao on stubborn habits in life. So line 3 first. 无有, 2 characters, that which has no substance. Let me break down these characters for you. First of all, the pronunciation. The pinyin looks like wu yu, y-o-u, but that's actually yo. Wu yo is the correct sound. So the meaning of that, the two characters, the first one means to not have something, to be without. And then the second one is to have something. So it would seem on the face of it that this could be a paradox, to not have something and then have. Well, that's actually not the case. Not a paradox, not an ironic expression of any kind, not a conflicting, contradictory expression at all. The second character you see, having, specifically means having substance or having form, having existence. So when you say 无有, you're talking about things that do not have substance, do not have form, things that are without substance, without form, as you see in the bullet point here. And specifically, 无有 is specifically talking about all the formless manifestations that we had discussed: water, air, light, thoughts. So once again, having is all about substance and form. It can also be a reference to shape, weight, mass. Now, in modern times, we know a lot more about things that are lacking in substance, lacking in form. We know about things like sound waves, right? That's also formless. We know about things like magnetism, gravity, radiation, electricity. There's a whole lot more that the ancients were not aware of. Last time, I even talked about the Higgs field. The Higgs field is the ever-present field that gives mass. It was theorized back in 1964, proven by experiment in the Large Hadron Collider in 2013. So only 7 years ago, experimentally proven. So absolutely fascinating. The Higgs field is also something that is formless, and that's pervasive. We've always had it. We don't think about it, mostly because prior to 2013, we didn't know anything about it. Now we do. So let's talk about the formless, or that which has no substance, going into that which has no openings, line 4. And let me break down those characters for you as well. 入无间 literally means to enter into that which is without opening. So when you're just looking at the literal transcription here, it's possible to be misled into thinking that, oh, you're talking about maybe going into a place without opening a door, without knocking on the door, opening the door, and then going in. No, that's actually not what it means. Without opening, in this case, means like without gaps, without an entry point. So a solid object would be that which is 无间, without gaps or openings. But the formless can go into it. Now, the examples that we talked about previously, they all apply, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But basically, here's the main idea. To enter into that which is without opening means to leak through, soak through. And when we talk about leaking and soaking, you can think about water getting through things. And there's permeate, which probably better if we think about in terms of a gas, smoke, permeating, a mist permeating through the air. Saturate, infuse, etc. So in the previous slide, I spoke of things like magnetism and electricity. So we all know that you can have a solid bar of iron, and it seems like nothing can get into it, like water, air can get into it. but electricity will go right through. And that's another example of the formless going through, totally transmitting through something that has no opening. And let's come back to the water example. So, for instance, suppose you have this wooden box. It's very sturdy, it's well built, and you use it to store your valuables. So you put heavy lock on it. So now you have a lockbox which is secure from thieves, but it's only made of wood. So if you were to throw it into the pool, water will leak into it, water will get inside the box. If there's a disaster like flooding, water can get into the box. So that's one example of the formless going into that which has no openings. So the box has no openings from the perspective of a thief, but it has plenty of openings from the perspective of water. So there's more. Now, what if you improve this box? What if you make it waterproof? So the inside may be lined with wax paper, or you create a box not out of wood, which can get wet, but you create one out of metal that is waterproof. So then, wouldn't you have protection of your most important documents? You can put those inside and expect that they will not be damaged by water, no matter what. So it would seem as if, in this case, water cannot go into that which has no openings, like the metal box. But that's not strictly true. Number one, remember that the Tao is infinite in duration. It's all about eternity. That means if you have long enough time putting this metal box in water, it'll rust right through and then get inside. So it may take millions of years, it may take a long time, depending on the box, depending on the construction, but from the perspective of eternity, it's just a blink of an eye. But that's not all. The ancients noted that even the most secure box that they could design and build would not offer complete protection. So they didn't need millions of years to get inside something like this with water. If the disaster is fire instead of flooding, the formless flames, another manifestation of the formless, the heat, also formless, will penetrate through the box to destroy the documents within. So again, another example of the formless going into that which has no openings. So let's review. This is the slide that we looked at as a recap from what we talked about before. In every case, in the case of water, water is formless. It's cutting into rocks that has form, has shape, has mass, has substance. Air, wind erosion, air itself is formless, and yet it is able to cut into rocks, which has substance, shape, mass, weight, etc. Then we have light, which is formless, and it's cutting into metal, which is even harder, which is even stronger than rocks. What about thoughts? Okay, this is where we want to talk about life. This is where we want to use these abstract examples to talk about something practical. How can we use the Tao to help us improve our lives, get rid of bad habits, cultivate good ones? And can we use Grandmaster Ching's example when he talked about his own life? So I want to spend a slide or two to talk about this. And this is inspired by Grandmaster Ching's example, Centennial. He spoke of applying 智柔, the Tao, and 智坚, negative patterns, to improving our lives. So this is the topic here. The Tao is the soft versus negative patterns. That's the hard. So why did Centennial think about negative patterns as 至坚? Well, for the simple and obvious reason that negative patterns for him and for all of us, for anyone really, they are the hardest problems that we need to solve in life. So Grandmaster Chen talked about people who are feeling, in the dumps of depression, feeling suicidal. They have a very difficult problem. Perhaps the most difficult problem of all in life, because some of the people who feel suicidal, they do actually go through with it. They do actually decide to end their own lives. So only the Tao has the power to really overcome that. Suicide, it's just an escape. And even short of suicide, even if we're just talking about bad habits, how difficult are they? Well, we know they can be extremely difficult. We have all seen people try to quit bad habits and fail. We have all seen people try to lose weight only to gain it all back. You've seen them, I've seen them. We've also been there ourselves. We probably all have some bad habits that we would like to do something about, or maybe cultivate more good habits that are life-affirming. So it's not unusual, basically, because of the difficulty, because of the problems that we see so many people have, not at all unusual to feel powerless about problems. It is as if those bad habits have no gaps, no point of entry, no openings, like a secure lockbox. It's keeping us out like the secure lockbox, keeping out a thief who wants to gain entry to the treasure that's held within the lockbox. For us, it is as if the bad habits are that big padlock, that secure box that we cannot open. We can't access the goodness that is within. So the question is this: how would you use the Tao to penetrate through something like that, the negative patterns, change them into something beneficial? What did Grandmaster Chen do to make that particular change in his own life? Well, it so happens that Centennial had a powerful intuition, and most of the time, most people don't have that gift, so we have to rely on teachings to make things a little easier for us to figure out. We can use the Tao to help us. The first realization is that all habits, good and bad, positive or negative, they all follow familiar patterns in the Tao, which is a circle. And there are all, good habits or bad habits, they're all the same. They're all composed of three parts. It's actually really important to understand the three parts, the specific nature of the three parts, and know how to adjust each one individually. That's how you break down a habit and start making changes. So the three parts are the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning part, this is you. The beginning part is the trigger. The trigger is what activates the habit. So for someone, it may be a craving, perhaps to smoke a cigarette, same as Centennial before he quit. When he had the habit, he will be getting that cue, hey, it's time for a smoke. So that's the beginning, that's the trigger. Then for him, for Centennial, back in those days, the habitual actions, the middle part is taking out a cigarette, lighting it, and then start puffing away. That's the routine. That's the habitual action that he engaged in. Now, this could be happening. You could be in the middle of your bad habits, and you could be thinking to yourself, I really shouldn't do this. I really shouldn't, have this chocolate chip cookie, or I really shouldn't be overeating in general, whatever that may be, whatever the bad habit may be for you. And you may be thinking, I really ought to quit. But you're trapped in the pattern. You're trapped in the habit. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot that you can do about it. And when the smoking break is over, you have the payoff. You have the end. You've gotten something that satisfied the craving that triggered you in the first place. And therefore, you're okay for now. You're okay temporarily. But you know that you're going to be reiterating, you're going to be repeating the same thing before too long because it's a habit. So next time you get the trigger, the call to action, you respond to it just like before. You go through this process all over again. That's why they're habits. Habitual repeating patterns. So what can we do about this? I want to break it down for you in 3 parts. Recognizing that habits can be good or bad. Habits can be negative or positive. When you see it broken down like this, it will become very easy, very obvious to tweak one part of it, to swap one part for another part. And that'll be the beginning for you to replace a negative pattern with a positive one. And by the way, this is all coming from the latest research on human potential, human psychology, habitual patterns. There's actually quite a bit of research devoted to that. Fascinating topic to be delving into, but let's talk about them from the Tao perspective. So the habit, as I said, has a beginning. The beginning is the cue, a signal, catalyst, initiating trigger. And what I described before, using Grandmaster Chen as an example, would be like a craving to smoke cigarettes. And for other people, the craving can manifest as feelings of boredom. So for someone who's engaged in a different addictive behavior, it may be, I'm bored. What should I do? Well, for some people, it may be to bring out the phone and then get into the smartphone addiction that so many of us have, right? It may be feelings of anxiety. I feel anxious. What should I do? Maybe some emotional eating, comfort food will comfort me. So we know that this is how negative patterns begin. There's a certain craving, there's a negative feeling that you want to address. What about a positive habit? How can you recognize, distinguish positive habits from negative habits? Well, when it comes to a positive habit, the craving is replaced by a sense of discipline, a surge of motivation, the call of duty. I gotta do something. It's time. All right, let's go. I feel fired up. Those are the keywords. Getting fired up, getting excited, anticipation is all associated with the positive side of it. The negative side of it, something to relieve. Something that makes me want to feel better by engaging in the addictive behavior. So there's a distinct difference between positive and negative beginning at the very start of the habit loop. What about the middle part? The middle part, the habitual pattern that you follow, that's the routine. Those are the actions. If it's negative, then you know that it's addictive behavior. You know it's not good for you, but you are caught up in it. You are on rails. You can't stop yourself. You have to keep going forward with it. Maybe you're even thinking to yourself, okay, well, tomorrow for sure. Tomorrow, I'm going to make a brand new start and stop this habit, except tomorrow never comes. So what about positive? How is that different? Well, instead of the addictive behavior that you know you should stop but cannot, on the positive side, when you engage in a positive habit, you are going through actions that you know contribute to your health and overall well-being. It may be difficult. There may be an element of suffering, like when you are in training, when you are training and working hard to make that little gain to improve, better your own performance, may not be comfortable. But it is something that you know you should do versus the addictive behavior that you know you should stop. That's the difference. What about the end? So the end is the payoff, the reward, the reinforcement. The reward reinforces the behavior so that you will repeat it again, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. In the negative habit, the bad habit, it's a temporary relief of the craving that kicked it off in the first place. Relief of the craving. Whereas a positive habit, it's a profound sense of fulfillment. It's the certainty of knowing you did what you ought to do. Completely different. So when we're looking at this, there's also the looping back part to the beginning, the repeating part, the rinse and repeat. Reinforcement leads to repetition. In the negative habit, this is associated with frustration. There seems to be nothing you can do to stop yourself. You feel kind of doomed to repeat your mistake, to continue the pattern that once again will manifest itself. Or it's quickly replaced by self-justification, rationalization. No big deal. It's only a pack a day. Or I can stop anytime I want. This is nothing compared to someone else who's smoking 3-4 packs a day. This is nothing. Justification. Or even deeper level, I'm not going to change myself for anybody. I got to be me. This is who I am. I'm someone who engages in this addictive behavior. So what? It's my life. Huh? Excuses. So this difference between the negative and positive is what Grandmaster Ching noted in his own life. And what he did was that he chose to swap out some of these things with what he knew to be positive, and that was the Tao. So rather than to give in to his own bad habits, which he talked about as smoking and drinking, he decided to refrain from doing those, maybe use a different behavior to substitute. Like for him, the substitute for smoking was that he had to use chewing gum. So he replaced one pattern with another. And then he would focus on his studies of the Tao and make that a habitual pattern for him. And with that particular switch in the routine, in the pattern, he could also easily switch out the negative result, the relief from craving, with the positive end that he was looking for, a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that he did what he should be doing. So for those that are interested in how one can use the Tao to overcome a difficult, stubborn bad habit, this is the broad outline of how the soft can overcome the hard. Of course, knowing what to do, knowing how to do it is different from actually doing it. So if you are in the process of reevaluating your habits to decide what to keep, what to discard, I would like to suggest that you keep the Tao in mind and use the Tao as a way to help you get to the newer version of yourself that is more ideal, that is more in accordance with your vision. And now we can go forward. And I want to get into line 5 for just a moment. And here we want to talk about Wu Wei. This is the important concept in the Tao, the term that we see all the time. Well, this is an instance of it, and this is actually a very important iteration of the term Wu Wei, as I will explain. It is important. So first of all, the pinyin is easy. This is one of the easier terms to pronounce for someone who is a native speaker of English, Wu Wei. And it's important here because this chapter provides an important illustration of the Wu Wei concept. Why is it important? It's because in the West, oftentimes you're going to see people talk about Wu Wei as non-action or do nothing. Both are wrong, but they are quite appealing to beginners. I've lost count of the number of times I hear people say, oh, that is so cool. Non-action, do nothing, I can relax, I don't have to do anything. I like this philosophy called the Tao. Then I have learned to keep my mouth shut and not say, well, that's actually not what it means, because that kind of ruins it for everybody. And they are not really interested in the discipline of the Tao in the first place. They would really rather stick with the relaxation of non-action and do nothing. But here, line 5 talks about Wu Wei, talks about the benefits of Wu Wei, and then line 6, it talks about the teaching without words. Now, the teaching without words means that you teach by your actions instead of by what you say. So that's action-oriented. Teaching without words is a manifestation of Wu Wei. How can that be if Wu Wei is not action and do nothing? So here, it's connected to the teaching without words in the next line, and it points to the importance of doing more and talking less. So the doing more part, if you thought that Wu Wei will be doing nothing, this will be contradictory to that. But if you know that Wu Wei means unattached actions, you can see that non-action and do nothing can't possibly be right. They cannot possibly be the right interpretation. And it doesn't matter how many books are written by people with credentials to talk about non-action and do nothing, this is simply not the original intended meaning, as we can see in this chapter. So by Wu Wei, Lao Tzu is really talking about the benefits of taking actions without attachments, not the benefits of doing nothing. That's quite different. So how does that apply to the teaching without words? What it means when Tao masters teach, that is, when they demonstrate how to live in accordance with the Tao, their focus is on living in accordance with the Tao, not on teaching. Living in accordance with the Tao is what goes into the effortless, graceful flow. And an example that I used in the past is when you work with this powerful wave by surfing it, not by battling it. So real Tao masters are not so concerned about students comprehending this lesson, the lesson without words, the lesson conveyed through actions only. They know comprehension will come when the time is right. Just like when we say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is ready, the lesson appears. Understanding appears. So in this relaxed way of teaching, this is how the authentic Tao has been passed on from one generation to the next. And this is where we get into the most important concept of all, 不言之教. 不言之教 means the teaching without words. And here you see the pinyin, 不言之教. Literally, the 4 characters, the first character means no, no or not. The second character, yan, means to speak or to say or to talk. The third character is the apostrophe s. And then the last character means teaching or teach. So what does that mean? No speak apostrophe s teaching. Well, we put it together, translated as the teaching without words. It means demonstrating the right way with what you do instead of what you say. Rather than to lecture, let your actions speak louder than words. This is by no means well known in the world. This is by no means well practiced in the world. We only have to look around to see how we have so many people who can talk the talk, but not walk the walk. And human nature is the same today as it was in ancient times. So when Lao Tzu said that, there were not that many people that knew, that understood the benefits of unattached actions and teaching without words, what is actually the same for us today. So it's extra important, especially important for us to concentrate on this concept today. 不言之教. So we're talking about the teaching without words. This is the major concept in the second half of Tao Te Ching, chapter 43. So here's the key to understanding the teaching without words, and there are subtleties associated with this. The key in mastering this Tao is to be, first of all, to be mindful of the effect that you have on others. The example you set for them can be positive or negative. So here we're talking about teaching others or affecting, influencing others, not with words, but with what you do. And you can exert a powerful impact on other people without being completely aware of how powerful that can be. And it can go either way. It can be good or bad. Generally speaking, in society, the higher your position, the higher your profile or visibility, the more widespread your influence will be. But in a more constrained perspective, if we're talking about just your social circle, family and friends, your influence is also quite considerable. Even when you say nothing, people pick up on things. They pick up on your expression, your mannerism, your physical posture, body language, all of those things that actors study to hone their craft. Furthermore, when you're in a family setting, when you think about, for example, parents and kids, parents play a defining role in passing on their values to the next generation, because children will emulate what parents do rather than to hear what parents say. So there's actually a story associated with this that I would like to share with you. It's an interesting story called The Feathers of the Kingfisher Bird. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, in ancient China, roughly 1,000 years ago, the beginning of the Song dynasty, and the founding emperor of the Song dynasty, called Song Taizu, he was the first emperor. He was quite aware of his own historic role. He wanted to do everything right. And he wanted to do everything right as much as possible, not just himself, but all of those people around him. Song Taizu, the first emperor of the Song dynasty, had a daughter 永庆公主, that was the princess. Now, the young princess, like other girls her age, simply loved to dress up and look nice and look pretty. So once the princess saw the 翠鸟. The 翠鸟 is the kingfisher bird and was really taken by its colorful feathers. She was just amazed. The feathers were so incredibly beautiful. That shade of blue, that orange, wow, she loved it. It didn't take her long to order her servants to acquire the beautiful feathers for herself. And then the princess fashioned them into decorative highlights for a new outfit. So she was excited, she was having fun, she wore it to go see her father, the emperor. She thought that the emperor would appreciate it and would compliment her on the beauty of the feathers, that he would like the colorful feathers as much as she did. Okay, well, that's not the way it turned out. That's not the way it panned out. She went to see the emperor, and the emperor's reaction was not exactly what she expected. He did not seem very pleased. He seemed very serious. And with that serious expression and serious voice, the emperor said to the princess, take off the feather decoration and give it to me. Like right now, young lady, never use these feathers again for your clothes. She was surprised. She said, Father, why so serious? You know, what's the problem? It's just a few feathers. It's not even worth that much. And the emperor told her, there is a lot more to it than that. Think about it. Think about your station. Think about who you are. Think about your position in the court. Think about what's going to happen when other people see you wearing such colorful feathers. You can guess they will try to do the same thing. They will copy this fashion statement. You may create a trend. You may cause a whole bunch of people to try to do the same thing, first within the court. All the ladies in the court will try to do that, and pretty soon outside as well in the imperial capital. This can spread. And when many people want such colorful, beautiful feathers, merchants will compete to sell them. The demand will drive up the price. All the more reasons for the merchants to sell as many as possible. And the hunters, they too will compete to capture these birds. They will be killing many of these beautiful birds in the process. So think about all the repercussions that will flow from the simple decision to wear this today. You must always keep in mind who you are and the effects that your actions will have on other people. The princess was like, wow, she finally understood. She thanked the emperor for these wise words. So it's a brief story, but I like the story a lot because the emperor was using himself as an example in teaching the princess that he too was always very careful in his thoughts, his words, and his actions. So what have we learned from this story? What can we extract? What might be the Tao lessons that are associated with chapter 43? So first of all, as I said, the emperor pointed out the importance of what we do to the princess. It's not just what we say, not what we tell other people, but our actions, our decisions. Oftentimes, your actions have more of an impact on others than you may realize. And also, think about this. The emperor was not just being the ruler, but he was being the parent. He was being the dad. And dad has a duty to teach daughter the value that he feels are important. And this is what the emperor did. History records that Song Taizu practiced what he preached. He was always mindful of his actions. He was always thinking ahead to the possible repercussions that can arise from a particular decision that he makes. Now, of course, we may not always have wise parents passing on positive, good values to kids. It can go the other way too. This may not be the case with all parents. Sometimes negative lessons get passed down to the next generation. Is that possible? Well, of course it is. We can use a modern example to illustrate that. So think about this example where once there was a boy who got in trouble at school. He was sent to the principal's office for detention, and later on, his teacher got in touch with his parents to let them know that he got in trouble, that the boy got in trouble because, well, he was caught stealing pencils from a classmate. Now, when the boy got home, the father was livid. The father was angry. He yelled at the boy, "Why did you do such a dumb thing? You want a pencil? You want a pencil? Well, look at all these pencils that I took from the office. Isn't that enough for you? What is wrong with you?" The irony, of course, is that the father was lacking in self-awareness. In referring to the pencils that he inappropriately lifted from work, he did not realize that he had given a negative example to his child, given the teaching of no words in a negative way. He did not realize how effective the teaching of action was, whether positive or negative. And because teaching without words is a powerful tool, it is all the more important to use it wisely, use it carefully. Now there's more. We can also generalize from the example, for the example given for the emperor, for the princess, and we can see that it's important. Whatever rules you set for yourself, you must follow for yourself. Whatever rules you impose on other people, you have to follow and honor for yourself. So the emperor lived up to that. The rule that he wanted the princess to follow, he followed himself. He was not above those rules. This is important because the moment you place yourself above the rules, you compromise your integrity. You sabotage your own authentic authority. So for instance, if you want other people to be on time, you must be especially punctual yourself. This is important because mastery of this Tao is what helps you increase your authentic power and 德性. So 德性 is a special term here. It means virtuous nature. 德性 is what Tao sages, real Tao sages possess. It is rare. It is not usually seen. And it is why oftentimes I say that in the continental US, there are no real living Tao sages. 德性 is extremely rare. But 德性, when you have it, it is how sages are able to influence other people effortlessly without any attempt to do so. Without trying to influence other people, they nevertheless have a great deal of influence. So there's another story associated with that that I would also like to share with you to illustrate this principle. The previous story that I shared with you was from about 1800 years ago, well, roughly 1,000 years ago, and this one goes back even further. This story is called 以身作则, setting an example. And this comes to us from the Three Kingdoms period, about 1800 years ago, or roughly 700 years after the time of Lao Tzu. And for perspective, by the time we got to the Song dynasty, it had already been 1500 years since the time of Lao Tzu. So let me tell you this story about 以身作则, setting an example. Once upon a time in ancient China, during the Three Kingdoms period, which is about 1800 years ago, there was a warlord who was known for the discipline of his army. And he achieved that discipline by setting an example, 以身作则. He was a controversial figure. This historical figure who actually walked the earth was controversial in that he was often depicted as a cruel villain in literature, in works of art, in entertainment, in plays, often depicted as a cruel villain. However, he was controversial because he was also praised as an effective ruler with great charisma, who treated his subordinates like family. So one day, he was leading his army on a march, and his army was passing through vast fields of wheat planted by farmers. Now, wishing to win the respect of the farmers, he gave strict orders to his men. No one was to step on the planting. Violators will be beheaded. It was important for him to send a signal to the farmers, let the people know he respected them. He respected their property, the crops that they had planted. Therefore, his officers dismounted and led their horses slowly through the fields, and the infantry, the foot soldiers, followed. His command, the command of the warlord, was relayed to all of his soldiers, so everybody was extra careful in crossing the field. They would use their hands to sweep aside the wheat stalks as they passed through, as to not disturb them. So this had an effect on the farmers who were watching from a distance. They were surprised. They were impressed. And this was because they were so used to marauding armies that did not give them a second thought. They did not care about them at all. These marauding armies would trample their fields, and it would be nothing. Will be nothing to them. So as the farmers watched them pass, they praised the leadership of the warlord. Some even knelt down to thank him. So everything was going well. Everything was going smoothly when all of a sudden a bird flew out from its hiding place among the wheat, right near where the warlord was, atop his horse. So this had an effect that startled his horse, and the horse, the frightened horse, reared up and charged off into a random direction into the wheat field, and the warlord tried in vain to struggle to control the horse, to bring the horse under control, to calm it down. Eventually, the horse did calm down, but it had already trampled a sizable area in the wheat field. So the warlord dismounted to look at the damage. Then he turned to his officers. He said, well, the rules are the rules. They apply to me just as much as they apply to any of you and all of the men. Let's proceed with my beheading. His commanders were like, what? They were all shocked beyond words. They were all, no, Your Grace, we absolutely cannot do that. The warlord said, you refuse to do it? Very well, I shall simply do it myself. He unsheathed his very sharp sword and proceeded to cut his own throat. All of his commanders rushed forward, grabbed his arms, grabbed his hands. Stop him. Your Grace, please, please, no more of this. If you kill yourself, who will lead us? Please, you cannot do this. So they pleaded with him. They refused to let go until he relented. So he shook them off. He nodded to them. All right, something must be done. Instead of cutting off my own head, I shall now cut off my hair. So he went ahead and did exactly that on his blade. Then he said, let this be a reminder to everyone that I absolutely mean every word I say. And this was the example from the warlord, Cao Cao, when he followed the principle, 以身作则, to set an example. And now what I would like to do is to break down this expression, 以身作则, for everyone. So here are the characters. Here is the pinyin, 以身作则. Here's the meaning. The literal transcription, first character is with or use. The second character is the body or the self. And then use the body, how? As example. The last character there is the character for example. So the meaning, when you put it together, is pretty easy to decipher. It means use yourself to set a good example for others to follow. This particular warlord was also a poet, was a highly literate man who had studied 论语, the analogues of Confucius. And keep in mind that Confucius himself also predated this warlord by hundreds of years, 600 or 700 years roughly. He read 论语, the Analects of Confucius, extensively, and there was a passage that he knew very well, which is what motivated him to do exactly as he did. That passage is as follows. 其身正, 不令而行. What does that mean? When one is upstanding and honorable, others will follow, even without any commands. So guys, this is the secret of 德性. When one has virtue, when one has integrity, people follow. You don't even have to try to convert anyone. They will follow on their own. So when one is upstanding and honorable, others will follow even without any commands. And then this is followed by this line. 其身不正, 虽令不从. This is the opposite scenario. When one is not upstanding and honorable, others will disobey even with explicit commands. Everybody is going to be like, why should I listen to you? You can't even follow your own rules. You want everybody to do X, Y, Z, but you can't do it yourself. Why should I do it for you? So he understands this lesson of leadership, and that is why he takes pains to set up a rule and then obey and honor that rule just like everyone else. That's the essence of 以身作则. This brings us back to the example of authentic Tao sages like Centennial, that's Grandmaster Chen, and there is another Tao sage that I was very fortunate to meet, Cai Qianbei, Grandmaster Cai. They both exhibited this particular quality, 以身作则, and they both influenced so many people without trying to influence anybody. They were both easygoing, down to earth. They were never demanding. They never demanded obedience from anyone. Far from it. They focused on themselves. They focused on their own practice. They wanted to make sure that they themselves do it right. But the vast majority of the people who encounter them are inspired by them. I know because I was inspired and I saw the same reaction from everyone else. What is their secret? What is the secret of Centennial and Cai Qianbei? Well, nothing more than what we have talked about here. 不言之教, the teaching without words, 以身作则, to use yourself as setting an example for others to follow, and 其身正, to have honor, to be upstanding, honorable, have integrity, have that consistency that everyone will naturally and automatically respect. So now we're ready to start wrapping up this chapter. We have gotten through what is in my mind, the most important concept in the second half of 43. Now let's take a look at line 7. So the benefits of actions without attachment, that's line 7. We're talking once again about Wu Wei, and this is a reiteration to drive home the point. Why does Lao Tzu feel necessary to repeat? Because the ideas that he's advocating here are contrary to what most people do in everyday life. For example, we oftentimes see people who cannot practice what they preach, who cannot do what they say. We see people exposed as hypocrites. They will preach morality, but then they get caught doing exactly what they condemn. We've seen many examples of that. In the Tao, the aspiration is to be the opposite. So Tao cultivators, which I hope includes all of us, will not preach or condemn, but Tao cultivators will require a high level of consistency in themselves. And that consistency is to keep words, actions, and thoughts aligned. What you think is what you say, is what you do. So the other part is similar, the teaching without words, and also the action without attachments. The other part, we have also seen, it's not just the people who are exposed as hypocrites. We also see many people who take action with a lot of attachments. And by attachments, I'm talking about emotional baggage. Emotional baggage, mental baggage, things that they're dragging around in their minds, things that they are attached to. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of people, I would even say most people, take actions wanting everyone to know about their achievements. That's a manifestation of the ego. They also compare themselves against other people endlessly. They're constantly trying to do that. They're constantly trying to make sure that they've got one up somebody else. And if they can't do that, if they cannot put themselves above other people, they go to this one. They may try to undermine others out of jealousy or resentment, maybe sabotage someone out of that feeling of jealousy, maybe envy, maybe resentment. And here again, Tao cultivators, Tao sages aspire to be the opposite to that, to the opposite of what most people do. So the focus in the Tao is to do the work. External perception will take care of itself. And this is the much more relaxed and joyous approach to live in the Tao. And this is going to take us to the last line. The last line says, a rarely matched in the world, and we got 5 characters here. The first 2 characters means the world, and then the character in the middle, the third character means rare, and then the last 2 characters means match it. So if you string them together, it sounds like the world rarely match it. And what it says is, well, the actions without attachments, teaching without words are rarely matched in the world. So why is that? Let's explore for a moment. Why is it rare? It's rare because despite the power and effectiveness of Tao teachings, actual practice of the Tao was rare in ancient times. Now you may be a little surprised by this because sometimes I see that people may have rose-tinted glasses, rose-tinted lens when they think about the past, that the assumption must be that at the time of Lao Tzu, the teaching of the Tao was extremely well known and practiced by most people. But that's actually not the case. The Tao was reserved for the few. Back in those days, not because it was a privilege to study the Tao, it could be very widespread, but because understanding and actual application of the Tao were always rare. Over time, the ideas and concepts from the Tao were woven into the fabric of Chinese culture. Despite that, the practice remained rare throughout all of Chinese history. It was always the rare individual who would actually study the Tao and apply the Tao. That's the way it's always been. So things haven't changed all that much. Fast forward to modern times, it's still the same way. People ask, why is it that so few people in the West are aware of the Tao? And why is it that so many of them have instead gone into sort of a distorted, twisted version of the Tao? Well, it's not so different than in ancient times. Nothing's changed all that much. The bottom line is this. The Tao is and has always been an advanced course in life. It's not Life 101, it's the advanced course. You've got to have the basics pretty much squared away. You've got to have the basics pretty much, as they say, all your ducks in a row before you are ready for the Tao. If you are not ready for the Tao, you're probably better off having people tell you what to do, you know, what deities to pray to, etc. So here's the final point that I want to make in this slide. We who study the Tao are the fortunate few. So I don't mean to suggest that somehow we are the elite. I just want to make sure that we are aware of the reason why, as we look around, you know, frankly, walking the Tao can be a pretty lonely path. I think we all know that, right? Why is that? It is because of this particular slide. It's the way it's always been, and probably the way it's going to remain for the foreseeable future. Rather than to think of it, the loneliness, the solitary path, as a negative thing, I want to suggest to everybody that it's our good fortune and blessing. It means that you and I are ready for the advanced course. With that, I would like to take us to the paraphrase. Line 8 was the last line of chapter 43. Now, let's paraphrase the whole thing beginning to end to complete our discussion. And then next time, we can discuss the full circle. So it's a short chapter, so we can go through the paraphrase quite quickly. It's only in 2 halves. The first part is about 至柔 and 至坚, the softest and the hardest. And also about no substance, no openings. We'll get to that. Here's the paraphrase. In this world of ours, it is always the soft that overcomes the hard. Like the relatively weak rider controlling the much more powerful horse. We see this basic principle manifesting everywhere, from water cutting through rock over time to soft moonlight, illuminating the nighttime landscape. It is always the formless that gets into seemingly solid objects, and this can be applied to life, where we can use the soft and formless Tao to get into and change our hardest and most difficult problems. So that's the paraphrase. As you can see, not a translation at all. Then we get into the bottom half, which, remember, 不言之教, the teaching without words, is the primary importance in terms of concepts. Here's the paraphrase. From this, I can extrapolate to see the benefits of actions without attachments. I can also see the benefits of teaching without words. Because when you lead by personal example, you don't have to lecture anyone. People will still follow. These are the best ways to apply the idea of the soft overcoming the hard. There is tremendous power to them that is not well known or well understood. And that is why the skillful practice of the Tao is so rare in the world. And there we have it, the paraphrase. We managed to get that done today. Now it's time to summarize chapter 43, to talk about the application of it. And I want to start by reminding everyone of the summary from before. Previously, the important thing was the softest and the hardest. So then the summary from before had to do with observing the world. This is external, noticing how the soft overcomes the hard. And then turning your gaze inward, this is internal, and apply the same soft approach. The soft overcomes the hard. And then last time, in the last summary, I ended with a quote from Grandmaster Chen De-yang. He said, use the soft to overcome the hardest things in the world. And what he meant specifically was use the Tao in your life to overcome your greatest challenges in your life. And I hope everyone takes that to heart. Now, the summary for the second half. So remember, the most important concept is teaching without words. There are 3 key points that we talked about. Number 1, what you do in everyday life exerts more of an influence than you may realize. So don't be like the princess who is not looking ahead to see the impact of her actions. Number 2, whatever rules you set for others you must be sure to follow yourself. If you want people to be on time, you must be punctual. Mastery of this Tao is how sages can effortlessly influence everyone. It's truly wonderful and magical when you see it demonstrated in real life. I've been very fortunate to witness it myself, and that's why I am so inspired. How did I do it? Well, first of all, 以身作则. Use yourself to set a good example for others to follow. Then, the writing from Confucius. When one is upstanding and honorable, others will follow even without any commands. When one is not upstanding and honorable, others will disobey even with explicit commands. So great wisdom from Confucius. I hope you will be able to see that an actual quote from Confucius feels different from the many inaccurate quotes attributed to Confucius that you find online in the various memes. This is actually from the Analects. And this too, I hope you will take to heart. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.